All right, welcome to a new episode of Cali Claptrap. Today we have on Luke Healy. Luke is a co-founder of the Integral Christian Network. Luke, thank you so much for being on the podcast.
Yeah, thanks for having me, Matt. Good to be here.
Awesome. Well, we've done a couple interviews together. I've done your WeSpace group, so we are familiar with each other. So hopefully this rolls off the tongue. But I am really interested in sort of knowing a little bit, and for our listeners as well, sort of identifying what makes Integral Christian Network different than your normal Christian organization.
Yeah, well, Christian's a really big umbrella, right?
Yeah.
So, when people hear that word, they think a lot of things. And that's there's some good things and there's lots of other things as well. We put integral in front of it because we really think that for all of its faults, our religious traditions can offer us so much as long as we're able to carry them forward and evolve into better forms, more holistic, more integrated approaches to how we approach spirituality. And with a lot of richness and tradition, we draw especially on the mystical tradition and embodied, and then kind of integrating into that insights from integral theory and lots of other places to try and find a more just a space that I know it's been in my experience personally, as well as what I've heard from a lot of others, that a lot of the forms, if we're growing, if we're learning, if we're evolving, then we're going to outgrow maybe the church communities we've been a part of or spiritual communities. And so there's a lot of needs for, new forms, new ways of doing things, new spaces of connecting. So that's kind of what we're about. Yeah.
And now you offer are they called WeSpace Groups, or is that the formal name for them?
Yeah.
Can you talk a little bit about the WeSpace Groups and how long have you been doing them, and what's the reception been so far?
Yeah, definitely. So that's one of the needs that we saw rising. Actually, one of the core ones in starting was this need for community of these people who are evolving, who are kind of growing beyond maybe some of what's available in traditional churches around them. And, through the internet, we can connect across, we're not bound by our geography quite as much. So these groups meet entirely online. We've been doing them for coming up on 2 years now. I think we started April 2019, sort of the first few launched. And then we've kind of done, 3 rounds of groups a year. And it's been an evolving process, like we learned at first, we started, a lot has grown, but we've really come into a good form, and people are just so grateful for the community being able to connect with others who've kind of taken the long journey, who've kind of pressed through, continued finding others on the mystical journey, kind of in the Christian tradition, who speak a similar language. A lot of people have had trouble finding those people in their lives in the past. And then also too, the practice that we focus on, which we call whole body mystical awakening, is an embodied approach to spiritual practice. And that and kind of combining that with what we call integral prayer is sort of what the groups look like. So having those experiences of depth, community, and connection, and then a space of practice that really opens up us into a more integrated, holistic consciousness, evolving forward into greater love and all sorts of different things. So I'm sure we'll talk more about that. But
yeah, definitely. Well, I know I was a participant in that, and it was a great experience. One of the, I think we had one person sort of attend the first group, and then we sort of never saw the person again. And I was just wondering, do you get a reception that this is, as far as the embrace that people do, is there ever sort of a backlash, or do you ever get feedback that go, questioning sort of the format or anything where it kind of is offsetting to maybe the traditional practices that people are used to in the Christian faith?
Yeah, sure. That's a great question. That has cropped up a few times. Someone coming in and the experience is a little different than what they expected, or maybe something they're not quite comfortable with. Because we do kind of push some of the boundaries, some of the more familiar traditional edges of what people are used to see happen in groups. I think we've done a good job of growing in communicating what exactly we're doing in these groups, and kind of putting forth expectations, and then also kind of scaffolding into what we're doing as well. Early on, we we kind of just dove in the deep end and started out at it. We've really, I think, learned and done a better job of how to kind of build up to the full form of the practice and introduce, in ways, and then also just creating other resources that that help people learn about it beforehand. We have an ebook that really dives into what the practice is and what the groups look like now. So all those things kind of combined with, but we've had some, we had one woman in particular from England. She just was like, whoa, time out. I can't do, she kind of derailed the whole group process. Most people, if they don't resonate, they're quiet and then, okay, this is not for me, and they leave, and that's fine, right? It's not going to be for everyone. But
okay, so you just roll with the punches.
So
you and Paul Smith started the Integral Christian Network, correct? Mm-hmm. And it's mostly just you two sort of doing these WeSpace groups. And one of the is that correct also?
Yeah, for the most part. We've actually started just this last time to we also have some guides. So Paul and I are there for the first 3 sessions. The next 4, the groups are kind of on their own, and then we come back for the 8th session. And groups kind of decide if they want to continue from there on. And we've actually just started integrating another person there who's kind of the guide for the group and stays with them, and it's kind of stayed in the ongoing groups. So as we're kind of growing and getting more people involved, we're kind of building in some more of that support from other presence and volunteers and people as well.
Okay, good. So you are looking to broaden sort of your outreach and through sort of a systematic sort of approach to it eventually.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, it's funny when you're starting something, I very much personally want that to be a network. That's the third word in our name. That's really important. That it is something that is co-created, that is, everyone has some level of participation and empowerment to bring what they have to offer and bring their gifts. And, that sounds great. And we really want that to be the case. And a lot of times when it comes down to it, who's got to do it, who's going to do it, right? We want to invite people into it and give opportunities, and that stuff, it develops both organically and then also through sort of organizational development. And that's something we're trying to learn more about and figure out how to do, how to bring people into that. Probably more often than I'd like, it's just sort of falling on my shoulders, like, okay, I got it, it's got to get done, so I'm going to do it.
Right.
But trying to build that out, because we don't want it to be a guru approach. We don't want it to be focused on, this is Paul and Luke and this is what they're doing. Sure, we have things that we've learned and stuff that we're trying to offer as far as, a process and a practice. But really, we had a group that we met with just this last week, and it was their 8th session. So we came back after being gone, and the way they said it, is like, I feel like when this started, this was your group, and now it's our group, and you're coming to visit our group. And I said, perfect. That's exactly how we want it to be. So it's really meant to be a gift and empowerment to people coming into their own contributions to evolve not only our network, ICN, and the things that we do, but, the loving evolution of Christianity and society in their local context and in the whole world.
Yeah. What's been the biggest surprise for you so far?
That's a good question. Biggest surprise. I think it's been, I'm not easily surprised. I think because I don't hold a lot of expectations, I'm just kind of open to whatever comes. But just sort of like maybe the resonance, like the expanse. Like we have people in 13 different countries, and we've done very little kind of like marketing or traditional spreading the no financial investment in that. Just kind of like, okay, look, here it is. This is what we're doing, and it's really drawn people from all over, and people have shared it with others, and so that's been really surprising. It's grown. We're just approaching our 2-year mark, and we're going to have over 20 groups and over 150 people involved, and it's just kind of that resonance has been a little surprising how quickly that's sort of grabbed hold for people. So that sounds like I'm trying to sell it, but
no,
that is kind of what's been surprising. So yeah.
And that might lead to the next question. What do you identify as maybe your own personal mission and also the group's mission?
Yeah, I mean, my own personal mission, it's always evolving, and I think that's part of what I want it to be. Is it's it's my hope is that I'm constantly evolving into, greater, more full, more integrated consciousness. So I can't really know in this moment what that's going to look like next year in 5 years. But as long as I'm pursuing that, if I'm open, and recognizing, what another impulse for this starting was recognizing that for that to continue, I couldn't go any further alone. I needed others. I needed that to be a collective process, and that's what ultimately brought me into WeSpace. But as far as for the groups, I mean, I would hope something kind of similar, but also recognizing that, people come into these with different goals, different, some of them want to connect more with God or have a deeper spirituality or find community, find others who are resonant. But a big part of the practice and what we're doing in these groups is really to bring in a more integrated consciousness, to awaken to beyond sort of the confines of the mental structure of the mind that many of us are trapped in society, and also to go beyond the confines of individualism and discover a broader, more integrated consciousness kind of with and through others in the WeSpace. So
yeah. You send out every week these great sort of newsletters, sort of describing sort of kind of what's current and what you're focusing on. And your most recent one, sort of we're in the Advent season, Christmas season. I was hoping to maybe talk a little bit about sort of the womb and Advent and sort of how you presented that sort of in the newsletter.
Yeah. So we do a weekly writing every week, that we send out. Yeah, for Advent this year. So we had, in our whole body mystical awakening, we kind of focus on 4 centers, which comes from, I don't know if I want to talk about the background, but we have head, heart, womb, and feet. And feet is kind of the whole body as well. So the womb, the spiritual womb, is kind of a newer one for a lot of people. That's something that, we're maybe a little more familiar with the heart or the head, but the womb is just this really beautiful space with all sorts of things. Maybe people are more familiar with Hara or the gut center for Enneagram or things like that. Yeah. But we had this event in October called Nurturing Wombfulness, and just kind of went on this collective exploration of talking about sort of the qualities of cultivating wombfulness, right? The sense of knowing from our spiritual womb that has this creativity and intuition and vitality. And so that kind of just led really naturally into Advent for me and in my writing process and what I'm learning. And it just kind of was like, hey, there's a quote from Meister Eckhart that, what good is it if Christ is born 2000 years ago, but is not born today and in my context, in my culture, in my life. So that's not an exact quote, but that's a paraphrase. So it's just kind of the sense of like, hey, we are the mothers of God. We are bearing Christ within us as well. And that's, not Jesus, the person, but Christ, the interfusion of the divine and the material that is manifest in all things. And so we bring that forth through our own wombfulness, through bearing and holding within us, right? Bringing to term the new creations, the conceptions, the divine conceptions that are coming about through us and into our lives. Cool. Yeah. So this last week I was writing about, let's see, that was the one. So it's kind of a series that's sort of unfolding, right? In a few different elements of that. And this last week was all about like dreaming possibility, right? So like if if a mother's carrying a baby, you don't know who that baby's going to be, right? Their life could become anything. It could be, you can have fears or you can have hopes for what's possible for the future. And this is a real invitation to accept and press into a practice of not only hope, but then kind of dreaming, mystical dreaming, what is possible, right? What might be born forth as a blessing and a gift to the world from us to help make things a better place, and not giving into cynicism or, being confined to what we think is the data is telling us. And, certainly not dismissing that, but just knowing that there's often more than what we think we know, and kind of dreaming into possibility in that way.
Yeah. I know I was listening to your new podcast too that you've put out a few episodes of, and I don't, this wasn't the exact quote, but you kind of talked about it as Christians being like the religion of like incarnation or something of, and so I thought that was kind of a really interesting way of looking at it. And I think this womb idea really presents it well. And whereas most churches you would go to, that would almost be blasphemous, but I think what's your take on sort of presenting this idea that we are, first of all, like what is Christ consciousness and what is the mystic approach? Like where is the mystic trying? Is it just to unionize with that Christ consciousness? And then if you could just sort of flesh out or define maybe what that is and what is the goal there?
Yeah, yeah, for sure. The wombfulness is a big part of it. It is kind of this incarnational sense, right? So Christianity as a religion of the incarnation is that Christ came in human form, right? That God is not this separate immaterial being out there, right? And not just Jesus Christ, Jesus as a primary form of the Christ, but that Christ is within all creation. So sort of a pan and theistic God in all things, underlying within the tradition. That's very much kind of might not see it as much in modern American evangelicalism, which is what I grew up in, but but a lot of the Christian tradition holds much of that, and Eastern Orthodoxy moving into divinization. I mean, there's a lot of tradition within Christianity that holds into this, and so it might seem unfamiliar at first to a lot of people, but it really is this sense of owning that we are created, not only created in the image of God, but we are also participants in the divine nature, which is a quote from Scripture. And so how do we participate in that, right? How do we not just think about God or pray to God, but actually move into Christ consciousness, which is the coming together of the divine and the material, or the divine and the human. So we can experience that in our bodies, right? I experienced that, in all the centers, but like I mentioned before, the feet is kind of that center of material reality, of connecting to the Christ energy in the earth, in rooting and grounding, but also on kind of like a quantum and cellular level. Like I experienced that kind of vitality and vibrancy of that kind of in all of my cells. So we're getting a little more mystical there, but the sense is like Christ consciousness is not just like thinking about God or knowing more about it or learning in this sense just in our mental understandings, but moving into the experiential, felt, embodied sense of kind of knowing from that consciousness that is present in our whole being, in our cells, in our womb, in our heart, and also in our minds too, of course.
Yeah. I know one of the big things I was sort of not really taken back by, but in our group, when we got to the wombfulness part, and I think this was Paul talking about it too. The womb is also kind of connected to the genitalia part, and so talking. I just read the book, The Return to Eros, Christina Kincaid and Mark Gaffney, sort of talking about that sex models eros, but it doesn't exhaust eros. And so when I took that, I really took it as sort of connecting that piece of sometimes, growing up also Catholic, you kind of displace and you think of the womb area as sort of profane, that it's not really spiritual. And as you get older, you're suddenly in conflict because these two energies are suddenly not connected at all. One is like sort of, displaced as far as, the devil or whatever it might be. But as you get older, at least in my journey too, of trying to, how can this all be connected? How can this all be one part of God's creation and still kind of, live from a place that you're not acting out of sin? And so I was sort of interested to, how is that a angle that you've either identified in your groups, as far as how do you sort of take maybe this old teaching and discard it as far as sexuality being profane, and also be able to maybe get rid of that and interpret it in a new light, in this mystical light where all these energies are sort of, at peace with each other or working together?
Yeah, that's a great question, and reflection on your experience, because there is so much modern Christianity that is kind of heart up spirituality, right?
Yeah.
There's also a lot that's head up, right? You could kind of cut off your head and do the whole thing that way. But yeah, so really moving down and integrating into more of the body. And yeah, certainly eros is a really powerful energy that's connected into that space. And I think there's a lot in not only Christian tradition, but a lot of religious traditions that has a real fear of that. For a variety of reasons, maybe the power that's there, or the different ways of trying to control those earlier. Kind of a lot of magical structure is also kind of connected to our womb space as well. So there's sort of this enchanted power there that maybe was wanting to be controlled or dominated or subverted. So that's one of the things in all of what we're doing here with sort of evolving Christianity, or people who are growing. There's a lot of trauma and wounding and stuff that people are coming out of from traditional religion, or that they've experienced in their past. And that's really real. That's always something that we're bringing forth. And so everyone kind of has different healing journeys on that. We do try to we follow Richard Rohrlach, where he says the best criticism of the bad is the practice of the better. So in many ways we're trying to show, by integrating that, by practicing into that it is very much included and welcomed and necessary and important. So Pierre Teilhard de Chardin has some great writings as well on eros, and integrating that and evolving forward with it. So it's a learning journey that we all go on in different ways, and try to bring forth both healing, and then also growing into new and more ways of integrating that kind of forward, as well as healing.
Yeah. And also being part of your groups, you guys are, both you and Paul, very mindful of bringing in sort of the feminine. And I was sort of wondering if you could talk a little bit about how do you integrate both the masculine and feminine energies when someone does the whole body mysticism practices that you teach?
Yeah. I mean, the womb space is very much, really connected to the feminine, as well as other things too. But that's a real primary space for it. Even calling it the spiritual womb is an embrace of the feminine, right? Like, we all have a spiritual womb, whether we have a physical one or not. But women have been subjected to a lot of patriarchal language throughout Christian tradition and other forms. But well, it's time for men to have to do a little stretching here if they need to. But it actually comes from a verse or a saying of Jesus, where he says, out of your womb will flow rivers of living water. And basically all of the male translators change that to innermost being, or your belly, or your depths, right? But the word there is actually womb.
Mm-hmm.
And so there's this sense of sort of flowing forth, and so that's connected to the feminine. Paul, although he is a man, just has also a really beautiful integration of the feminine and masculine in his own person and being. And there's a lot of different ways that manifests and tries to come forth beyond wombfulness as well. That I think some of it is an emphasis on the relational, more than learning structures, and some maybe more traditional masculine forms in that sense as well, that we're really recognizing the need and the emphasis on the relational space, that we're not often ourselves kind of praying alone all the time and learning and study, in our minds. There's that's maybe a more traditional feminine sense, right? WeSpace, and other things too, but that's what kind of comes to mind first.
Yeah. Maybe just to switch topics a little bit, something that I was also curious about, and I didn't hear too much of it when we were doing the groups and stuff, is the devil is always such a popular figure, I think, in biblical history, and maybe the mythology and stuff. Do you guys focus on the shadow? And I'm assuming the devil will be sort of that shadow figure. Do you guys bring it up, discuss it, or is it how do you guys sort of deal with that piece of integral?
Yeah, good question. I mean, another pretty loaded area for a lot of Christians, right? A lot of different
Yeah.
views and elements of that, and people are at different places. You know, I think for the most part, that's something that we honestly haven't addressed a ton and haven't really approached. I mean, we definitely recognize shadow, and that's something always present in our groups. We put a lot of, work into having some safe guidelines on how we hold loving space for one another, and recognize, and try to not move too much into spaces of projection and that sort of thing. But as far as sort of our work of dealing with the shadow, the negative side, the devil, or even the presence of evil, or all that kind of stuff, that's pretty loaded, with a lot of previous stages and forms of Christianity. So yeah, I mean, honestly, we haven't really gone there too much, or haven't really needed to. Yeah, I know it's not a great answer, and maybe there's probably a lot more to be explored there that could be.
Well, there's a lot of baggage that comes with it,
Sure, right.
Yeah.
Mhm.
So I was
And
just
that's,
saying, go ahead.
yeah, that's just like, yeah, that's how it is with a lot of things, right? A lot of Christian things, there's baggage, and so how do we do a good job of kind of holding that tension between, healing what's kind of weighed people down in the past. There's a lot of stuff out there in Christian circles about deconstructing, about kind of processing through the harmful effects of traditional religion and healing, what's kind of come from that, and those, a lot of those are really great. I think that's such an important work, and kind of what we've more focused on is to say, okay, that work's being done. A lot of people are in that space. We want to kind of say, okay, then what's next, right? How do we do that better practice? How do we move into forms that are a little less overtly encumbered by those previous hangups, or the things that might really weigh us down, and recognizing we all are continuing in that work, right?
Yeah.
But really trying to focus more on doing the better practice, and then dealing with those things in other ways, not necessarily as much in our groups, sometimes though.
Yeah, cool. Well, I think you were the person that turned me on to Jorge Fererr, and I finally got around to reading his book, Revisioning Transpersonal Theory. I was hoping maybe you could just sum up a little bit about what you got from his work and how you've integrated that into your the practice that you do.
Yeah, absolutely. And Paul's much more of our scholar and reader, and so I've definitely read some Ferrara, but he was the one who kind of found him and integrated in, and really, what he brings in his participatory approach is a real, brought a real element of the embodied, right, of a necessary, sort of necessary approach to include these different forms of knowing, right? Kind of the moving beyond the imperialism of the mind, as he puts it, like to move into a greater integration of also our other centers of knowing, our heart, our womb, our feet. That really was brought forth a lot from Ferrara. And then, kind of another element that Ferrara brought forth is, he calls it the many shores, right? That a lot of integral approach to spirituality can be fairly single pointed hierarchical to this sort of non-dual, once the space and everything below that is part of the journey to get there. Certainly coming from Wilbur, it comes across that way a lot. So even union with God, kind of the traditional Catholic, or within much of the Christian tradition, the ultimate goal of the spiritual life is kind of seen as this, that's good, but you have to kind of go to this ultimate, non-dual space of one taste, or however, different ways that it's put forth, or not only that, but other forms as well, right? This is the one goal, this is the space that we're all going, but recognizing that in the sort of co-creative process of emergent spirituality, that things come forth in lots of different ways. And so just kind of allowing for a breadth of the spiritual journey that that's going to unfold for different people, for different communities, in a variety and a number of different ways. So yeah. There's one other thing,
so
but I think I'll leave at those two. Yeah.
Okay, good. Yeah. So we are in sort of our our Christmas season, and I know, I'm sure you probably relate to this as well, sort of, you can get sort of wiped away in the material sort of Santa Claus version of, getting presents and all, and there's a definite joyous factor of bringing families together, and sometimes the whole message is, the religious message is sort of lost in that process. And I was wondering, from your perspective, what do you think at this time of year, what are some traditions either you go through or some steps you take to make sure you hold on what you consider to be the message of Christmas for you personally?
Yeah, yeah. Thanks for asking that. There was a time when I really struggled with Christmas and kind of the, it was really meaningful to me as a kid growing up, and a really special time, and actually a really holy time for me. Like I felt like I just connected into, the idea of Emmanuel, God with us, is just so powerful. And then kind of some of the other encumbrances of it as that fell away. I was like, what does Christmas still mean to me? How do I approach this? And I think right now I really feel just like a freedom to embrace the magical, depth quality to it, right? So yeah, the materialism, the Santa Claus, like, yeah, that there's certainly a lot of trappings there and such, but
Mhm.
I'm not cynical about that. I have a 3-year-old, he's almost 4, and a daughter who's almost 2, and that, boy, if you want a little magic Christmas, just be around
Yeah.
your little kids and the lights on the tree. And that's really so much of what the integral approach is, right? To embrace the good parts of what's come before, and to not think that it's all something we have to leave behind, or certainly want to critique the things that have caused damage, and but also to understand that there's a magical depth here in the tradition that we can tap into in a variety of different ways. So right now I'm doing that through my children, and also
Mhm.
doing it through the wombfulness, right? Through
Yeah.
connecting into bearing the Christ. So that's really what it's looking like for me right now. And yeah, just saying, okay, and how do we do that with our kids, right? How do we kind of hold that magical element, but yeah, not make it about 20 presents under the tree, or we set out boots, and my son wrote a letter to Saint Nicholas and the elves, just okay, try and do it a little differently, still keep some fun and joy about it, and
Mm.
find our way into that. It's sort of that way of like, okay, what are new forms that are also old but are going to serve us better going forward. So, and
Yeah.
that's hard to do, like, on your own, is another thing. Like a lot of people I talk to, families with young kids, it's like, they're trying to create materials that, aren't talking all about Jesus' sacrifice, or, just different things like that. So that's also one of the hopes of the network of Integral Christianity, is that we need each other to kind of co-create and bring about these new forms. So like, maybe people get connected and there's a few sets of parents with young kids, and they're like, hey, what if we created like an Advent curriculum or something like that? Or not, curriculum is probably not the right word, but just like,
Yeah.
how do we find these new forms? And that's another sense of like, oh, we need each other to do that, to see what's worked and what hasn't and what's resonant and all
Mhm.
those kind of things. So
Yeah. Well, I want to take this opportunity to thank you for the work that you've put in, being part of the integral community that we're in. One of the two major things that I've looked for are, first of all, a community that practices, and not only practices but touches the subtle states. And so by bringing together the WeSpace group, I had that opportunity, and just growing up Christian, as far as being able to further your practice. And so I see the work of you and Paul, of what you're doing. I'm not sure if I could put it into description as far as how meaningful I think it is in our history to have you guys be sort of charging forward with this and bringing it to light. And I hope that other people can sort of participate in it, because I think the group challenges people to get out of that cognocentrism that you've talked about. And while it's a little bit scary at first, I saw a really good, you know, being part of the group that we were in, really collaborated. We grew together, and it was such a wonderful experience. So I just wanted to say thank you for doing that, and it's a wonderful mission. And yeah, thanks again.
Oh, thanks, Matt. I really appreciate that. That means a lot. And yeah, I love all the stuff that you're doing with this podcast and the growing down with the other. I mean, you're just having these great conversations and pursuing it with your passion as well. So thank you also for your work. And yeah.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much. I'll include in our description where people can find you. And again, thanks so much, Luke.
Great. Sounds good. Thanks, Matt.
Appreciate it.